Hey guys, this is Jake again. In my last video, I showed a disassembly of a computer, and today I'm going to do the reassembly of the computer. Since then, I've taken apart the rest of the case, cleaned up all the parts so that everything is less dusty than it was, because it was pretty gross in there. And we'll see once I'm done if everything gets put together properly, if the computer even boots up. I think one of the most useful parts of learning how to put everything back into a computer is it helps you when you're trying to upgrade your computer, put new parts in, take old parts out, usually in the reverse order because you don't want to jam two things into one spot. And it's a good fundamental thing to have, just to troubleshoot and repair a computer. Not everybody has spare computer parts lying around, I understand that, but you can always talk with one of your friends at work, at school, whatever, see if they've got something extra that they're not using, if it happens to correspond to a part that you might have broken inside of your computer. If you like what I've been doing with these videos, please click like and subscribe to my channel. I'll try to put out more videos in the future. Thank you very much. Alright, the first part I'm going to put into the computer case is going to be the motherboard, because it's the biggest and bulkiest piece of equipment that can go in here. You want to make sure everything is aligned the way it needs to. You can usually determine this by figuring out where your input-output ports are located. That's this portion right here. Inside the case, down here in this corner, which we showed in the last video, is where all of those line up. So I'm going to use that as my guide to where I position everything and make sure it all fits. I also want to make sure that any stray cables, which I know I have a couple of them in here, are going to be out of the way. And once it's set into place, I can see that all of my screw holes are aligned properly inside the case. And I'll just take all the screws and put them in there. I think I mentioned in the last video that you don't want to tighten down too hard on these. You just want to get them in there tight enough to feel snug. Pretty much once you stop feeling any resistance, you should stop screwing in the screws. If you tighten too tightly, it can warp the motherboard, which is something you don't want because it's not going to work properly if you do that. You can have errors, making everything have all the connections proper inside there, as well as just damage the circuitry on the board itself. If I'm lucky, I will prevent myself from dropping these screws off to the side, like I did last time when I disassembled the computer. I've still got the tools that can remove them, but sometimes when you drop the screw in the wrong spot, the only course of action is to take everything out and put it back together again just to retrieve it. I mean, obviously I would tilt the case and try to move it, with the use of gravity or to somewhere easily located. This one's, there we go, it's cross-threaded slightly there, but it's fixed now. And sometimes it's also hard to remember where all of these go, but like I pointed out in the last video, this motherboard is kind enough to have little white triangles next to all of the holes that hold the screws for the motherboard to the case. So you just identify where those go, and that's where the screws go. Now, in one of my earlier videos, I mentioned using a grounding strap for yourself. Mine actually got attacked by the cats and eaten the other day, so I'm not using that to do this. But as long as you touch the side of the case, you can discharge any static electricity you built up, and you're not really going to cause too much damage to the computer. So now I've got the motherboard in place. The next thing I'm going to try to put inside is going to be the power supply, because I got to start routing all the cables in such a manner that they're going to be out of my way, and they want to be in here. Now this one, I just try to figure out the orientation that this guy goes. I remember when I took it out that the label was up, so that's the easiest way to figure it out. You can also just look at the orientation of the screws on the back of the case to see how they go. This one's got a little guide notch to set it in place, as well as a release mechanism to pull it out. I remember this guy, when I removed it, was kind of a brute. Let's see if I can get these aligned properly. And then push this down in. Sometimes it takes some trial and error. It's It's not always the easiest thing to do in the world. Should be, you'd think. Yeah, there we go. It's not moving. And get all my screws. They go in the front of the case. I'm not going to reposition the camera to really capture that. But it's 3 screws. They go in pretty quick and easy. Just get them in place. And the screws will hold. I will have to reposition the camera slightly because of the stand it's on. Now the power supply, like I said, is fairly small. There is extra room in here for a larger power supply. I would recommend having a bigger one if you intend to use larger video cards or a bigger CPU and motherboard. They're going to draw a lot more power, and the bigger power supply you have, the less chance of running with errors. If you don't have enough power, your motherboard is not going to be able to draw what it needs to power the CPU, which is bad for business and can cause it to just malfunction, as well as your video card would also malfunction. Now this little guy, let's see, this cable went under this. This is just some cable management clips that were here. This guy, never did find out what it's for. It just looks like it connects right there. Had a little tiny screw, which I mentioned in the last video. It connects to some sort of sensors on the front panel of the computer. And no idea what the heck that's for. Where did I put my small screwdriver at? I had a smaller screwdriver earlier. I don't know what I did with it. I had that set off to the side, so now it's all screwed in. The next thing I want to do is going to be installing the case fan, because that guy was in the way of the motherboard earlier. So now that the motherboard has been reinstalled, I can put the case fan back in. So I just want to find the orientation that it's supposed to go. Start screwing the fan back inside. I probably should have paid better attention to my camera stand placement. Y'all can laugh at me if you want to. I'm just going to put these screws in slightly to hold it in place, and maybe screw 1 or 2 in tightly. The rest are going to be hard to do without bumping the heck out of this camera. It's nice to have a ratcheting screwdriver. You don't have to really reposition it all the time, and these don't require you to be super snug. Alright, so I've tightened 2 screws in there. That's good enough for now. I'll install the rest later. While I'm here at it, I'm just going to plug in the power supply cable to the actual motherboard. You want to make sure that the pins are lined up. Like I said, there's these 2 little guide notches on the side here. It's kind of hard to see. And these are somewhat tricky without a good source of light, and I don't really have that here. Alright, I got my handy dandy flashlight, and I've hooked up that plug I was trying to fiddle with, and I also took the opportunity to finally screw in the other couple of screws to the back of the fan so that I don't have to worry about that at a later time. So now that I've messed with some of my cable management here, I'm going to start plugging a few of these motherboard plugs back in. Like I said, these guys have their own muscle memory to them because they've been assembled for so long. But yeah, you just have to find the plugs that match what go to the motherboard. You know, your power supply, if it's a pre-built case like this one, has just enough to plug into what it needs to plug into. Other ones are bigger power supplies. They have modular cables design, so you can pull out and put in as many cables into the back of the power supply as you need to power all the components on the motherboard as well as your video card. This one only had 2 major plugs, so I'm going to get those both plugged in over here so that those are good. And then I had a tiny little one over here, head off to this side. Now this guy goes to some fans, if I remember right. They go right here. Okay, so the next thing I want to install is going to be the optical drive, which this one is different from what I'm used to seeing. It actually goes into the front panel of the computer. So I'm just going to reset this guy back a little bit, lock it into place. This slides into the front. Some of them will slide in from the inside. You just line it up, make sure you've got the screw, if there is one, to assemble it. Some of them will install into a carriage, similar to how the hard drive is. I'll show you that in just a second. And the carriage would just slide into the case. This one, because of the way it's designed, it goes in a different way. Okay, so got that back up. Then we've got the hard drive. Again, this one is installed inside of a carriage. You can see it gets screwed in on the sides so that it holds it into the carriage. Depending on the size of it, there may be a smaller carriage to hold it if you've only got the smaller hard drives but don't have a dedicated place for them. This one happens to be designed specifically for this type, so we're just going to slide that in there. And it kind of locks into place. And then there's a screw that goes in on the other side. Right here. It's easy to drop a screw, so just watch where they fall. That's why I like to have a nice open area to put these things together so you can kind of see where everything is at. Okay, now that I've got the hard drive and the optical drive installed, I'm going to reassemble the cables for them. I did take the liberty of writing down which one goes to what so that you don't get them mixed up. The cables themselves are exactly the same, but they're plugged into different spots on the motherboard itself. So in order just to remove any confusion from my part, I decided to make sure I knew which parts were going where. Alright, so over here is the power supply cable that I use for the from the motherboard to the hard drive and the optical drive. The bigger one goes to the hard drive, the smaller one kind of goes to the optical drive, and then this power pin goes down onto the motherboard where it's being powered from the power supply via the motherboard. So I'm just going to attach these guys where they go. A lot of this is just very simple plug and play kind of design where if it fits, that's probably where it goes. It's not going to have an alternative place for it to be plugged in, so you don't have to worry about it too much. If you're trying to jam something into place, you're probably putting the wrong thing into the wrong place. Now these guys are kind of routed out of the way through that. My orange cable went to the CD-ROM drive, and if you remember right, I had a blue cable as well. That one goes to the blue port, so I'm going to route the orange one into the orange guy here. So I'm going to put this power cord out of the way too. These guys have like an L-shaped connector, so you want to make sure that that's just lined up the same way going into the motherboard. Always the straight version versus like an L-shaped or a T-shaped position. I try to get the straight ones to go into the motherboard and the curved ones to go in here. In some motherboard configurations, it might be more optimal to go a different direction, but this one was very quick and easy and not too much of a fuss, and I just like to keep it that way. And do the same thing with the hard drive connector. Plug it into the blue spot here. Plug this guy in up here. Alright. And those kind of tucked out of the way. Next up, I'm going to be installing the video card. The video card, this one is kind of small. It's got a notch in between two halves of its connectors there. The notch is similarly placed right down here on the motherboard in the PCIe slot. You want to watch for the end of this video card to go kind of between the case and the motherboard itself, as it's going to slide into place where the input-output portion of the case actually sits. Now once I've got it aligned, it slides right down into place. Over here, if I pan back just a little bit, I would have a screw that goes in here for most computer cases. This one just has the quick release, so I'm just going to snap it into place and make sure it's snug. The next things I'm going to install are going to be the memory chips. This one, again, like the video card, has a gap here in between both halves of the memory chip. This one is shorter, this one is longer. If you were to look inside your case, down here, there's a little spot. If I had my light, it'd probably be better to show you. I'll set this down. There's a notch right here on the memory chip portion of the motherboard. That notch needs to be aligned. This half is shorter, this half is longer, so that's how you want to align your memory chips. So now that I know which one I'm going to put in, I usually like to put in this outboard portion of it first. You kind of want to see how the chips are aligned, so I'll turn on some light. Make sure it just sits at its notch there, sits in its notch. You can see the gap is lined up with that slot there, and you push straight down with both fingers. Both of the notches clicked back into place, so now the memory chip is going to be held in properly. Do the same thing with the other one. Make sure it's kind of aligned in the notch, aligned in its notch. Push straight down. Both clips have clipped into place, and now pretty much everything has been attached physically to the motherboard. See, I've got a few outliers. I've got this cable I needed to plug back in. That goes to the power switch itself. That goes into the motherboard there. That piece is plugged in. All the screws were installed. Making sure I've seen everything in here. And if everything is good to go, I can seal this guy up and try to fire it up. So I just push this guy back down here. If you forget something, it's kind of okay, kind of not okay. Depends on what it was that you forgot. If it was a really bad thing to forget, like a power supply cable, stuff's just not going to turn on. You may hear a series of beeps. Well, when you do, that just means that you're missing something somewhere. And you just try to figure out what it was. It's really a trial and error process. The more of these you do, the more likely it's going to work out for you on first assembly than it would for your very first time doing this. I'm trying to remember, honestly, if I put this case front on. Yeah, I probably should put this on first here. This guy has some little clips that seat and then latch into place like that. And once that's down, all I've got left is the overall cover, which sits down here. I'm going to make sure it's all seated properly, that it lines up. If there's any notches, they tab into where they're supposed to tab into to create a good little lock on. And then it's just a matter of putting in the last two cases. Now, you know you've done it right. I think it's kind of silly to say. If you've got no parts left lying around once you're done with reassembly, it's always frustrating when I put a case back together and realize I'm missing something and I don't know where it came from. And every once in a while it's just a random screw. Something isn't going to be held in quite tight. I usually try to take it apart, try to figure out where it goes, but if it's not that essential. I'm not going to worry about it, honestly. And there we go. Case is assembled. If you have any questions, fire them my way. Alright, now for the moment of truth. I've assembled the computer with a busted old monitor I've got and some leftover keyboard and mouse. It's always good having random pieces and parts lying around, because if you've got them lying around, you can swap parts out, as I've shown you already, to test what is malfunctioning inside of your computer. If you think it's one thing, you can swap out the video card and see if the video card is the problem. So now I'm going to try this guy out and make sure it powers on. Alright, I heard the beep and the power up, and the keyboard and mouse are lighting up. I hear the computer spinning. Lights are coming up on the base of it. You can see the monitor is busted as well. Again, this is just my dummy leftover junk that I have lying around the house. There we go. Starting to get a Windows boot screen. Alright, so everything worked out properly. I've got no other physical problems with this computer that I know of. I could probably get this to log in. It's not even got an account on my name. I have to use my son's name to log into it. The biggest factor going into how long this is taking to load up is probably the hard drive. It's old. It's a hard drive, not a solid state. Solid state works a lot faster. Let's see. There we go. Alright, cool. I was able to log in. His keyboard works, mouse works. Everything is perfectly functional, and I didn't screw anything up with this computer. Alright, so there you have it. A complete assembly and disassembly series of videos that I've put together for you. Hope you find this useful. If you do, click like and subscribe. Future content I'm looking at trying to put together is showing you how to order the parts online, how to pick different parts for your computer, and generally just how to upgrade and update what you've got going inside. So thanks again for watching, and have a great day.